our next speaker, who is Dan Lewi. Dan, let's wait till Dan comes up. Welcome, Dan. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good. He is coming to us from the UK. Dan and his wife founded the Cure and Action for Tay-Sachs Cats Foundation in the UK after their daughter, Amélie,
yeah,
was diagnosed with Tay-Sachs. The foundation helps pharma companies develop treatments for Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff diseases, ranging from gene therapy programs to drug repurposing studies. He has also served as chairman of the European Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff Charity Consortium since 2012. I've asked him to come give the patient's perspective. Essentially, we've heard from the organizers and the consortium how hearing from patients has an impact on what sorts of therapies are being pursued, what sorts of these many rare diseases get attention to them. And it often comes from the patient groups that squawk the loudest and get things. And we've had Dan, I'm bringing Dan on to kind of talk about what it takes to get things done, what it takes to get people, regulators, drug companies to pay attention to, your particular concern, which is, one of, 7,000 different rare diseases. So let me turn it over to Dan. We have him for 45 minutes. He's going to present, and then we'll have time for Q&A.
Great. So first I want to say to Chris and the team, thanks for inviting me to come along to share the story of what we've been able to achieve at the CATS Foundation. My plan of today is going to talk you through about the diseases that we support, the journey we were on since the charity was set up in 2011, and how we're actually able to go from having no patient network, having no research, no clinical trials 10 years ago, to suddenly be in a position where we have a global network, all collaborating, working very closely together with industry, and actually having a few gene therapy clinical trials started, plus some drug repurposing and small molecule programs, all different types of trials for these rare diseases. And it's been a very intense journey for us personally and as an organization, but there's lots of learnings that we share with other groups all the time about how you can actually make this happen. So I think the first things first is just to introduce you to the CATS Foundation. So we were set up, as Chris said, in 2011. At the time, there was no charity providing any support in the UK or actually throughout Europe. So Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff are known as GM2 gangliosidosis, very similar diseases. It's all to do with different mutations in specific genes. And unfortunately, they're actually terminal. So our focus is really on supporting families. We do that with equipment, respite trips, funeral funding, producing a support network and materials, and also driving forward the research and working closely with industry to develop clinical trials that potentially can either manage the symptoms of the disease to improve quality of life, or to have a curative impact, which is something we're really aspiring to. So about Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff, there's lots of information here, and I'll share these slides, but I think the key to takeaway point is that they're rare. So 1 in 320,000 children are actually born with this disease. Well, they're relatively common in terms of carriers. There's different types. There's an infantile, juvenile, and adult onset form. So infantile is the most common, and the life expectancy of 5 years of age, the kids are born, and over a period of time they regress. So they lose the ability to function independently. So they have regular seizures, they're unable to eat, they're unable to see or to hear, and they require 24-hour care. The juvenile form comes on slightly later, but the kids go through the same process. They end up needing to use wheelchairs, suffer from childhood dementia. It's basically a very cruel disease, and for any parent or family member or friend of a family to see a child go through this and suffer, it's very difficult. And it's also the same with the adult form, where although it comes on in adulthood, the prognosis is the same, though, with this slow ability to function independently. But what's important to take from that slide is that although it's a rare disease, this is a very common story in the rare disease community. This is something you will hear very regularly about: a very rare disease. There was no support. There was no one providing information. There was no research. Children are dying. And it takes normally a family or a group of people to stand up and decide that they want to make a difference. And this is exactly what we did. We wanted to make sure that if we couldn't save our child life, we could impact those children of the future who are diagnosed with this very cruel disease. Because we didn't understand how we could get a diagnosis in the hospital, we're literally given just a sheet of paper. This is the disease, this is the prognosis, go home and spend time with your child. It's going to be a terrible few years before she dies. We couldn't believe there was nothing in place to actually manage what you were going through as a family and to be looking at the research. We're fortunate that there was an organization in the US who were able to support us as we developed our mission. But I have to go back to this. It's a very common, rare story that there are people in this position all the time. And just to put this in context, this is a list of patient groups on NORD's website. So NORD is a national organization of rare diseases based in the US. Now, the font's obviously very small. This is just a list of their members of patient groups in the US. This is one country's worth of advocacy groups in the rare disease space. You times this by maybe 8, 9, 10 of other countries. Now suddenly you've got hundreds and thousands of rare disease groups who all have that same story. And in fact, it's a story that we're all trying to get out. We're trying to share, we're trying to advocate, but it can become very congested as a market because we're trying to raise funds, we're trying to raise awareness, we're trying to get industry involved, we're trying to drive forward treatments. And you start to see that actually, although we are rare as an individual group and as individuals, I mean, when I look at my friends, I'm the only group to have, in my group, to have a child who was diagnosed with a rare disease and a child who died. Actually, it's not that uncommon when you start going into this rare disease space and you start to see the kind of competition we're under, not just for fundraising, but actually to get industry to develop treatments for the children who we're trying to support. And this is another really important kind of slide to show that the beginning of our story, again, is not uncommon. Most charities start because of one person. In our case, we started because of Amélie. So when she was diagnosed in 2011 at 15 months of age, you know, she unfortunately had developmental issues, and over a period of time, she lost the ability to function independently. And we were told we would never meet another family. It's a rare disease. She would die and there's no charity. And what we want to do is enforce that change. And this is such a common story that so many other families are going through. And there is always one child or one individual who is that face of that rare disease organization. And that story, you can take out the name of the disease and replace it with anyone else's, and it will be the same. Diagnosed, no support, no information, no research, wanted to make a difference. And this is what we're all trying to achieve. So in terms of Tay-Sachs, this is Amélie just as she was, before she was diagnosed. You can see she was standing, she was eating. This is our last holiday before she was diagnosed, eating ice cream in Milan, having a wonderful kind of family holiday. And then you can start seeing the disease progression where she was very tired. She lost the ability to feed. Here she is with her brother and her sister. Here she is with her mum, you know, now in a wheelchair, having uncontrollable seizures and dystonic spasms. And then us being able to actually get all of that under control with symptomatic management, which is something that we really advocate for the organization. You can see that she lost the ability to function independently. And again, this is a relatively common in the rare disease space, that you see these children diagnosed with these cruel diseases and there is no support, no research, no treatment options. The CATS Foundation was born on the back of all of that, to look into that research. And we realized we had to raise our profile within the community. I think here it's very important to highlight the different communities that we had to work within. We had to work within the disease community, and we also had to look at the community as in research. We had to look at the fact that the research community is very congested. There are lots of rare diseases. Why would anyone want to look at Tay-Sachs or Sandhoff as an opportunity to develop a treatment? And we spent a lot of time looking at our messaging, looking at how we could highlight and pinpoint the right researchers, the right industry partners to drive forward our mission, which was essentially at the outset to save our daughter's life. But then when we realized that was never going to be the case, was to see if we could save the children of the future impacted by this disease. And that's been our single focus really as an organization, is we want to stop this disease so no one else has to suffer. And I mentioned it before, this is the statement we were told. You won't meet another family with a child affected by Tay-Sachs. You do your Google searches, bear in mind this is back in 2011, you still had horror stories. There was no support network, just that children die, giving a clinical presentation of the disease. But to be honest, if you look at that and replace it with any rare disease, it is the same story, the same messaging before these patient groups are started. you won't meet another family affected by a disease. And it's very, very lonely and isolating as a group and as a family to think you will never meet anyone else who's going through what you're going through. And that's really all you want as a family, is to meet someone else who can really relate to what you're going through. And it's a very, very difficult position to be in. Fortunately for us, they were wrong. And I think that's really important. So we were set up in 2011. We actually, I'll touch on it later, helped set up patient groups throughout Europe. So we went from having our very first European family conference, which brings researchers that we'd highlighted and families together in 2013 in Austria with 4 families, to suddenly expanding these out year on year, having them in large organizations like Euro Disney in central London, where we've gone from having, 9, 10 of us in the first meeting to having hundreds of people. And it really goes against the grain to what we were told, that you wouldn't meet another family. And the fact is there is. But the problem that we all encounter in the rare space is that first step to reach out to people. How do you do it? How can you do it? Who can help you share your story? Because as soon as your story is shared, you're then able to meet more and more people who are experiencing the same things that you're experiencing. And on top of that, you can then meet other families who may want to do the same thing, as set up patient groups and charities in their country to make a difference. And that's what we found has been really, really kind of fundamental in our work, and why we set up a European consortium, that we could work together, not just on a national level, but European and a global level, to drive forward research. And we'll see shortly kind of how we went about doing that. So as I said before, this is our goal, really. We want to save children and we want to give them a future. I think that's very, very important. It's something we always refer back to whenever we look at any projects that we do. See, the power of a community is realistically what we have, what we can use and what we can share and what we can do to strive forward the work that we do. We can see that potential. There are lots of families throughout Europe, but what we could do to bring them together. And this is something that you will hear, that families are told, you're diagnosed and you're told by the doctor, you are going to be the expert. And to me, this is a really important point to touch on, is that as a family who's being given a diagnosis of this complex rare disease, you have a clinician with 20, 30 years experience, and normally the senior consultant, because they're delivering such bad news to a family, telling you, you are going to become the expert. You have no idea what they're saying. You have no idea about the disease, even what it's called. I remember I was getting the disease name of Tay-Sachs mixed up with Niemann Pick, calling it Tay-Pick and Niemann Sachs. But they are telling you you're going to be the expert. And there's so much you have to learn, so much you have to read about and understand and speak to other families, that it's so important that we as patient groups help our families become those experts. And the little things can make a big difference. In that sense, it's what information we share, how it is shared, where they get it from. It's vital. And I'm a big, again, an advocate of educating families. So they are the experts. When the doctor does tell them, they are treated with the respect as an expert of the rare disease that they're supporting. So this is when we looked at how we would bring people together. We knew that research teams needed a charity to support them to get funding. They needed a charity to identify patients, and they also needed us to raise awareness. And families, on the other side, needed a charity to provide that support, find research, and needed someone to communicate with families. And it's where we as a patient group could bring these really important people together to drive forward clinical trials. Remember, back in 2011, there was nothing. So we were starting really with a blank sheet of paper about how we could drive forward this work. So the first things we did was get researchers together. We had a big scientific meeting in London to understand the landscape. And with that, we're then able to use that information to go to industry, to work with our research partners, to get funding and investment from different organizations to drive forward their work, because we needed that as much as they needed that for their work. And we were seen as an access point to families, which was key. And this is probably my kind of key kind of slide here, is that teamwork makes the dream work. It really can enforce change. Collaboration is absolutely key. No one works in a silo or should work in a silo. Everyone has an expertise and a skill that they can bring to the table. And we quickly realized our key skill is to bring people together. We can bring industry, researchers, clinicians, KOLs, and also families and other patient groups to drive forward their work. And by working together, we can actually make a difference. And I think this has been one of the big lessons that I've learned, and something I'm always sharing with other patient groups, is you have to be willing to work as a team. And that can be any part of the work you're doing, including messaging, including your outreach programs. So when we looked at the audiences, we knew that we had the disease community, the general public, and industry and researchers, all very different groups of people and all very different ways in how we communicate with them. You know, we had to target them differently. We all needed something from each other, but in a different way. So our messaging was very specific to who we spoke to get their buy-in and to get their support of the work we were doing, because without them, it'd be very difficult for us to drive forward what we wanted to achieve. And this is something that we were very keen on doing from day one, is to make sure that the message we send to the disease community is different to the general public and is different to industry and researchers. And to do that has actually enabled us to drive forward our work very, very quickly. And this is the other key thing that a patient group or advocacy can do. We put a face to the disease. The reality is, when we speak to people and we explain this disease, they can look at you and they think, okay, so it's very sad. But when they actually meet the children, we have regular meetings where we bring industry, we bring all of our partners, they get to meet those kids who are affected by this rare disease and understand the suffering and the pain that these kids go through, because it is incredibly cruel. And in fact, on this slide, only one of the kids is still alive. And I think that's kind of a big reality check as well. When we meet these industry partners every year, they start to see that it's cruel and children are dying from this disease. So this kind of is where I look at advocacy as a really important role. We're like that missing piece in the jigsaw. We bring researchers, funding, and patients together. We ensure we can all meet our goals, which is to drive forward treatments. And what we can do is give everyone what they need for that aspect of what they're trying to achieve. And I think as advocacy, we really need to make sure that we play that role effectively and efficiently, because at the end of the day, our parents and our families are relying on us to make sure we can drive forward the work of these groups to actually get these treatments into people. So we set our foundations very, very early, raising awareness, as I mentioned before, setting up a European consortium and setting up European charities. We never wanted to be a group who set a national, like a global organization up. We wanted to set charities up throughout Europe, because they would then become specialists of the region and the patients they support. I think that's been very important. We needed families who are willing to step up and do that. We established a disease registry, which has developed the largest database on Tay-Sachs and Sanofi within Europe. And it's been very useful, very important when we develop these treatments. And we joined that research community. And this consortium went from just us in 2011 to now having 5 groups, where we have groups in Spain, Germany, France, Portugal. We've got a few more potential members joining as well. And that gives us that consolidated voice. When we talk about messaging, it's important we all share the same message. We all look at research together. We have this one view on what treatments will or won't work. And if we work together, we can ensure that they get the right funding at the right time and drive their work on together. If we as patient groups work to silos on different projects with different industry partners, we'd get to a point where lots of these works would just take a very long time to come to market. So working together, we can drive forward those projects which can make the biggest difference to our groups. And then again, this is where we always come back to reality check, that these guys are vital, our patients. It gives everyone a reality check that we are trying to make a difference to our community. It doesn't matter if it's in the UK, in France, Germany, Spain, or wherever. Working together can potentially have this global impact. And it's so important that we always make sure they are the forefront of any discussion that we have. And I mentioned to you before that patients are the key. For us, whenever we speak to an industry partner, their question is, how many patients are there? Before, we didn't have a registry. We weren't able to give the accurate picture, but now we can give them numbers, we can give them data. They can run analysis on that data that we have that can show that there is a reason or a motivation for them to come into our disease community to develop treatments. It's not like they have a treatment that have no patients. There are many patients there, and we've identified them. And that's been a massive step when we go to pharma and into industry to talk to them about their treatment options, about bringing them into what we want them to do, which is to save their lives. And the numbers are really important. When you're that family who is that 1 in a million, or our case, 1 in 320,000, it really, I can't tell you the pain it hurts when they're told, oh, it's just a bit too rare for our research. And that used to happen at the very beginning. You don't have the patient numbers. Where is everyone? Where are these people? Which is one of the motivations for us to set up a patient registry, was to show industry. And now we have that data. It's been much easier for us to have a conversation with these people to show them that the patients do exist when they develop their treatments, that actually they're going to have a viable market then to go into. So I mentioned before, back in 2011, there was, this was a landscape at the time. There was one professor doing some work at the University of Cambridge who has become a very close friend of ours, personally and professionally. That's a program that was very early stages. We helped them secure a large grant from the MRC to move forward their work a couple of years later. But that was it in 2011. So it was a very kind of sad state, especially for the case of us having a child with Tay-Sachs, knowing that there was nothing we could really do and that no one was doing any work. We fast forward now to 10 years later, we can see this big difference here. We've got these different programs that are actually going on throughout Europe and the US. We've got gene therapy programs from different companies. We've got substrate reduction, different types of models which will potentially cure the disease. Drug repurposing to manage symptoms. We have lots of different work going on in the US as well. And we have lots of upcoming, and you can see these different organizations involved. 2011, none of this existed. To see the progress we made in 10 years has been vital. It gives hope to the families of the future, but it really gives credence to the work we've done, and that actually our approach does work. It's hard work, but actually it can make a difference. You can do this progress in 10 years. It makes you think what we can do in the next 10. And these treatments work. And when they do work, and they do go into the children, and they do stop this disease, it's going to be transformative, not just for us, but I actually think across science as well. We'll be able to get newborn screening programs in place and potentially get to the point where this disease is literally a footnote in history that was cured. And that's our pipe dream, but that's something we aspire to achieve, because if we think we did this in 10 years, what can the next 10, 15, 20 years achieve? And to us, that's really, really exciting. And the question here is how do we do this? It's all about collaboration, supporting, teamwork, working not just across patient groups, but also across industry, KOLs, families, everyone coming together, communicating and being, to me, the most important thing here, transparent. So everyone knowing their role, understanding what they're doing, knowing the industry have investors, they have revenue targets they must hit. Them also knowing that we have children who are dying, how we can align our goals. Having that trust has been so important, because it means that we're all motivated to find those treatments and find those cures and get them to the market. And we don't need any other inspiration other than just looking at the children. Every year we bring all these industry partners together just to meet the families, not to do anything else other than meet them, because it really kind of inspires them to realize why we're working these long hours, traveling around the world to present at conferences and to meet different people, because we can have a success. And that success isn't just because of one group. This is a success based across all the different patient groups. Here in Europe, there's also the guys in the US and also in Australia who we helped set up. Working together, understanding our role has been so important with that collaborative approach. The last few slides is to show you that kind of impact. This is Brandon and his brother Thomas. So Brandon is a little baby. Thomas was his brother who had Tay-Sachs. Brandon and his family never met a family diagnosed or affected by Tay-Sachs disease. And when Thomas passed away, they never met anyone else affected by it. Years later, when Brandon was all grown up, he was reading about us and got in touch, and he's become a massive advocate for us as an organization. And this is the first time he met another boy, this is boy Stanley, affected by Tay-Sachs. And I think to us, it's a really beautiful moment, and it shows the power of advocacy and patient groups. We can bring families together. Now, Brandon's family become part of our kind of wider community family. And it really shows that you can make a difference and you can actually bring people together so they're no longer lonely on this awful journey that they'll go through. For us, as a person, as a family, this is Amélie. She passed away in 2017 at the age of 8. She lived a lot longer than we were told she would. And for us, the key really has been that her life wasn't in vain. We set up a patient group never to save her life, but potentially impact those children impacted by the disease in the future. She got to live a full, exciting life. She had a brother, a sister. She went on holidays. She had a dog. She did all the things other kids her age could want. And so with that, we think it's really important we share this message of positivity that we can and we will make a difference. And when I mentioned before about how we would be in a better position in 10 years, we honestly believe we'll be here. In 2031, there'll be global treatments for these diseases because of the hard work we're all putting in globally with the different advocacy groups. I think it's very important we don't stop until we're there. And the final side really is all we want to do is give people hope. We had no hope when Amélie was diagnosed. We were told that she would die, go home, make some memories, but that's it. Families now have, a chink of light at the end of the tunnel, and that's so important because they can grab hold of that little bit of hope that potentially we can do something either to make their child's life just that 1% better in terms of quality, or bring it to the point to cure them. And that's also what's driving us on, that we can actually make a difference. So thank you for listening. These are my contact details. And as I said before, we are going to beat these diseases. Just we won't stop until we get there.
All right, that was very powerful story and very informative. I mean, I'm hoping the fellows will be able to realize that your story has been replicated by, numerous other diseases and similar patient groups. So we have 15 minutes for Q&A. We have some questions that have come in already. And also Daniel Lewi will be one of the 3 speakers in the breakout sessions that start at 3 o'clock Eastern Time, US. And so if you want to get in detail on what his group has done and what his journey has been, you'll have time to do that. So for the questions there, first from our fellow from Capital Radio, Malawi, Clement Edward Misaka. Has your foundation tried to reach out to African countries? In Africa, it is very difficult for a community to work together, especially when it comes to dealing with rare health conditions.
Yeah, this is the next step for us to expand out, kind of where else we can provide support. It's very difficult. It's very difficult as you expand out, because we have a model in place where we don't want to be the groups supporting people. We want to empower other patients and other families to set up their groups. As I said before, we've done it throughout Europe very successfully, and also in Australia. So we're always trying to find that right family. Unfortunately, not every family is able to or willing to do it. They either have very single focus on their child or their family member, or they don't have the resources all the time. But for us, it's hard when we can find a family who is willing to do that hard work. We support them all the way through that journey so they can be established and make a difference and support families.
Okay. So next question from Anna Sauerthal, who is with Der Standard in Austria. Could you tell us a bit more about the disease registry? What is registered and how is it shared?
So disease registry, actually, that's what I do in my day job, which is all about capturing patient data that can be used to develop either natural history studies, which is to understand the disease progression, or to be used by regulators as you develop clinical trials. So data we were able to capture that actually shed light on the disease progression. A lot of what we have is incidental or through journal articles just about either 1 or 2 individuals affected by the disease. We're actually able to collect data over the last 6-7 years now. And with that, we've been able to actually paint a picture of how the disease impacts an individual, how different genetic mutations impact an individual, and things like that. So we can shed a lot more light to understand if certain treatments may only work with certain genetic mutations, or how we can look at developing a treatment to alleviate one of the other symptoms that the disease causes. The thing about Tay-Sachs is that it affects all parts of the body, people in different ways. They all have the same prognosis, is that require 24-hour care and they die, but then have things like some have terrible seizures, some have terrible dystonia. It's all about what we can do treatment-wise to manage those symptoms to improve quality of life as well.
Okay, next question is from, well, actually, let me, I have a question for you about your personal story, because you made reference to your day job of So could you tell us a little bit about your day job, and when your daughter was first diagnosed and you were scrambling for any kind of support or information, I mean, how much of your life did this consume? And did you at some point, did the working on Tay-Sachs become your full-time endeavor?
So when Amélie was born, so I used to work in investment banking. So I was working in that during the credit crunch, and the bank I was working at exploded, like many of them did. So Amélie was born and diagnosed just as the bank I was working at went. So I was made redundant. So I had to deal with all of that information at the same time, losing a job, having a child diagnosed. And this literally consumed me in terms of trying to find treatments, trying to find researchers and industry, trying to save her life, like any parent wants to do. When it became obvious we couldn't, that's why we kind of drove forward the whole idea of the charity to see how we could reach out to people for children of the future. And working in advocacy actually changed my entire career direction. So I realized there was a lot more that I could give as an individual, sharing the story and working with different companies actually to drive forward their work. And my role, I work for a company called Pulse Infoframe, and my role is business development, also on advocacy. So I'm always bringing the patient voice, putting the patient at the forefront of the discussion with our clients to ensure they realize that they may have a great product, but you have to make sure it meets the needs of the patient community, because without that, it doesn't matter. You could have a great product, but no one will stick to it.
Okay. Next question comes from Marilba Nunez, a fellow of ours from Venezuela. What aspects could make research in rare diseases attractive to the pharmaceutical industry?
It's literally patient numbers. That's the key that I've realized over the last few years, is that industry will be interested if you can show them that patients exist, especially in the rare space. There's a lot of money to be made in the rare disease market, and there are lots of companies and lots of new biotech starting up all the time, but for them, they need to see patient numbers. So one of the things when I speak to other advocacy groups is to make sure you can show industry, when you speak to them, that patients exist. You become a viable market for them. And we all, advocacy groups, need to be realistic that industry are driven. Yes, they want to help patients, but also by profit. So for them, the profit is linked to patients, and every patient has a monetary value to it. So if you get aligned on those kind of values, then you can really drive forward research and projects and products, and that's kind of the approach we took.
Okay, when you talk about pitching the disease to companies, I mean, how does that actually work? I mean, how do you approach them? Do you go to the scientists first and then go to their superiors? Do you go through the front door? Do you try to find academic researchers who are interested? So what's the plan?
Loads of different ways. So I had two success stories. One was with a company who had a product that we were trialing into a similar disease, a much more common disease. And I approached them and said, look, it's great you're going to this big disease, but have you ever thought about the rare disease market? You could make a big difference. Play kind of the advocacy rare disease sob story to them. And they said, look, we would be interested if you could give us patients. So to them, we were like a secondary afterthought. And that was kind of knowing our place as a disease community. Most of these companies, we're not that first disease they want to go into. We're kind of the starter or the afterthought. But by playing up to that role, you can get so many industry partners interested, because you're already bringing together a consolidated community, patient numbers. And if the drug's already working something similar, why would they not go into another disease? It's in their benefit, to be honest, to show it works in multi-indications. And another approach we do is just to reach out to people and just kind of pitch. I think this is something that's changed quite dramatically in the last maybe 4 or 5 years, is advocacy pitching to industry their disease, saying you're working on a product in this area, why do you not think about us? And then you kind of sell yourself about what you have and what you can offer. And that collaborative approach I mentioned before is actually vital, because industry wants to work with an advocacy partner who they can trust, who is transparent, has good links to patients. They don't want to work with a group who is untrusting, who doesn't share any information. And so by actually having the right framework in place to be collaborative has been very, very successful in getting different industry partners involved.
Okay. Next question is from our fellow from India. The publication is 52. Ankur Palawal, Ankur Palawal. Have you heard of such success stories similar to yours from low-income countries, or are they mostly from rich countries?
To be honest, it's relatively new in the terms of small advocacy in the rare disease space driving things forward. There are lots of advocacy like the International Gaucher Alliance. They've done a lot of work actually in low-income countries where they take their work and they work in those regions. And in India, for example, getting expanded access programs in place. So it's all about having the right connections, getting the right doctors in those examples, and working with industry to basically show them that these patients exist, they're in need, and how they can help them. And that's actually been successful for some of the advocacy partners that I work with as well.
Okay. So this is from fellow Winnie Aguilar. He's a freelancer from Philippines, so 2 a.m. or so in the morning for her. Could mounting a popular campaign like the Ice Bucket Challenge or for ALS be explored for rare diseases in general to create wider awareness and raise needed funds?
Yeah, very much so. So we have the big Rare Disease Day campaign, which is on February kind of 28th or 29th, depending if it's a leap year, which really shines a light on the rare disease community in general. But the problem with that is, I had no interest in rare disease until I was touched by it. And then this is the big kind of challenge we're experiencing. It's when you start speaking to people who have also been touched by the rare disease or a rare disease in general, it's very difficult to drive up interest in those people who aren't impacted by it. The ALS Ice Bucket Challenge was amazing because it really got people gripped. And that's kind of something we're all aspiring to try and do. But in our community, we'll always focus down on making sure we can raise enough funds to use the funds appropriately. So I use like a gardening analogy. We don't want to own a huge park. We just want to have a nice tidy garden that we're proud of in terms of the money we raise. So we have no aspirations to be having multi-million turnover because we don't have the community to do that. We will never be able to raise the money to actually fund treatments, but we can play a role in helping organizations secure funding. As long as our community is well supported and well looked after, that to us is the most important thing. We don't need millions to do that. It's more making sure that we have the right contacts in place to ensure that they have access to treatments when they become available.
Okay. Question from fellow Sandra Cuff out of Guatemala. Industry and the research community were mentioned as key audiences and partners. Did any of your work also involve advocacy for governmental policy or public funding, or was that unnecessary?
For us at the moment, that's going to be the next step. When treatments happen for us, then we'll start looking at trying to work on policy. And for us, that will mainly focus on things like newborn screening. So once a treatment's available, so we have a curative rare gene therapy program, we want to make sure it's captured at source. So as soon as someone's born, they're diagnosed, they get access to the treatment straight away. And the only way we can do that is by developing policies and working with the right groups to have that implemented. That's a much bigger kind of project for us to do, but we can't do that until we have the treatments in place.
Okay. Question from fellow Bob Rohr from the United States. How can patient groups and funders push for standardization so that work across labs can be compared and compiled?
That's a gold standard kind of question. I actually have no idea how we could do that because all the groups work so, unfortunately, they do work independently. That would be more bringing the rare disease community advocacy groups together to work on a project like that so we could get better transparency.
Okay, so we have time for just a couple more questions here. This one is from Aaron Prater of the Gazette in Colorado Springs, Colorado, United States. What would you say to families of children with rare diseases that affect quality of life but not lifespan when it comes to advocating for the development of treatments?
See, this is a really good question, actually. So we always, with Amélie, we had no idea when she was going to die. We didn't know if she could have lived into her teenage years, to be honest. We made sure she was comfortable at home. So our advice is always to make sure that the children are comfortable. You never go too far in terms of prolonging the disease versus prolonging life. And that's a big question that people sometimes overstep, is where they intervene so much, they're literally just prolonging a disease in an individual rather than prolonging life. And for us, it's As long as someone's comfortable, well looked after and happy, that's the most important thing. And we had a very kind of positive environment at home that we knew it was awful. We knew she was going to die, but we didn't need to remind us that that was going to happen. We kept that positivity going. You know, she lived a lot longer than we thought, and we did lots of things together. And she passed away peacefully with her mum on a Monday evening. And at 5 o'clock, I was picking other kids up from school and nursery, and it wasn't traumatic. And to us, that was possibly the best thing, that it wasn't a traumatic death for her or for us. It was very simply, she decided it was her time and she went. And I think that was done through the fact we didn't overstep the mark in terms of intervention.
Okay, and I think this will be the final question in this round, but as I said, Dan will be available for the fellows in the breakout sessions that start in 45 minutes. This is from Matilda Mbenwe of the Standard Group in Kenya. Stigma and fear around rare diseases. Stigma and fear surround rare diseases. What would you suggest is the best approach in building trust around them in our health systems?
It's so difficult. I think with the rare disease space, it's to show that although someone is affected by a rare disease, they're still a body, they're still alive, and they have the right to have a high quality of life. I think by doing that and advocating on that side is so important, because it doesn't mean that that person should be shut away and never seen. They should be given opportunities to have as high a quality of life as possible. And as advocates, that's kind of our role, to make sure that happens, and people have access to treatments or have access to information to ensure that can happen.